This is for Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for an answer. This is not just a war over stolen land. Why do you think little boys are throwing stones at tanks? And we'll never really know how many people are dead. They drop bombs on innocent girls while they sleep in their bed. Israel is a terror state, they're terrorists that terrorize. I'll testify my television, televise them telling lies. How many more resolutions have to be violated? How many more children have to be annihilated? This is not a war, it is systematic genocide. But whatever they try, Palestine will never die. Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Hello, I'm Chris Williamson, and this is Palestine Declassified. And we're coming to you with a different look today after the British Home Office tried to close us down by harassing the studio where we used to record the show. But despite this setback, we're determined to continue highlighting the struggle to liberate Palestine. And we won't shy away from exposing Israel's endemic brutality as well as its rapacious ambition to create a greater Israel either. So in this episode of Palestine Declassified, we'll be disclosing how the Zionist entity utilizes data centers to spy on, terrorize, and murder Palestinians as part of its hybrid warfare campaign. These data centers facilitate the automated targeting decisions that Israel's also deploying against the Lebanese and Iranian people. That's why the Islamic Republic have responded to the illegal war being waged by Israel and its American puppet by launching drone strikes to destroy data centers located in the region. Now, joining me to discuss this issue is our resident expert, David Miller. He's a co-director of the lobbying watchdog Spinwatch, a senior research fellow at the Centre for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zayem University, and the UK's leading scholarly critic of Israel. Today's guest contributor is the Beirut-based award-winning journalist and political commentator Laith Marouf, who established Free Palestine TV in 2023, which is continuing to provide vital news coverage on the ground in Lebanon and beyond. Welcome to the show. David, just say a bit more about these data centers. I mean, what do they actually do and why they've been targeted by Iran?
Well, they've been targeted by Iran because they're directly involved in the attack on Iran, but more importantly, that they've been directly involved in the genocide in Levant, in Gaza, and in Lebanon and other places too. So the first attacks were on the 1st of March, actually. So very, very early on in the conflict, the Iranians sent missiles to hit 3 Amazon Web Services data centers in Abu Dhabi and indeed in Bahrain, 2 in Abu Dhabi and 1 in Bahrain. And they were protective action, and there were mass outages across the services that they provide. And that was the beginnings of that process. Now, what then happened was on the 11th of March, Tasnim, Iranian news agency, issued a statement from the IRGC claiming that they were going to start to attack other data centers, and they named specifically 5 or 6 companies: Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Google, NVIDIA, which is a US-based but also has a big Israeli presence. Oracle, of course, we've discussed Oracle on this show before, led by Larry Ellison, who's been buying up the US media, CBS and TikTok, etc. And lastly, of course, the well-known Palantir. So the Iranians have said that they're going to start to target these they said this on the 11th of March. What they've been doing, of course, these companies, is that they all have these data centers and research centers in the region in West Asia, including in Tel Aviv and in other parts of occupied Palestine, but also in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in the UAE. And there's altogether of these companies, 7 companies, there are something like 30 different data centers, in addition to other offices that they might also have. For example, they've got an office, one of them's got an office in Qatar. So these data centers have been involved, as everyone knows who's been paying attention to this, and we've covered some of this in our on our show is that they've been involved in all sorts of AI activities, which helps the Zionists to target individuals. Let's remember, of course, the Where's Daddy software, which is targeting people when they were at home with their families and destroying the whole families, and of course quite often the blocks around them. And of course there was the drones with the recordings of the children crying to encourage people to come out into the open so they could be assassinated. Tons of activity like that. Oracle have been doing this. The Palantir have been involved in this. Google have been involved in it. All of the companies have been involved in various elements of using AI for surveillance and for targeting of the Palestinians, and indeed also for surveillance and targeting in Iran since the attack on Iran started on the 28th of March. So this is a major escalation in terms for the Iranians to start to say, actually, none of your infrastructure of oppression is going to be safe, and we're going to start targeting it systematically. And since that happened on the 11th of March, there's also in the last couple of days been another statement from Iran with a longer list of American companies. So they've said that for every Iranian political leader who is assassinated, they will take out one American company. I'm not sure how that's actually practically going to be done, but it looks like they're starting to do that process.
Right, okay. Well, Leif, I mean, we know, don't we, that these data centers process real-time intelligence for the US and Zionist regimes and also train intelligence models for target selection. I wonder whether you could just explain how AI is increasingly being used by Israel and the US for that matter, to conduct their attacks.
Yeah, it's important to remember how the Western model and the Israeli model of warfare is an inverted triangle. Usually militaries are the largest part of them is the land forces, then is the naval, then finally is the air power. While the West has inverted it and the Israelis has inverted it in terms of the brute force. So we see the dependency on very expensive technologies using air power. Now we see the West also inverting the triangle of their intelligence gathering. It used to be that you need hundreds, if not thousands, of operatives to comb through the data that you're collecting information in order to track your enemy and so forth. So now what we have is an inversion of that with practically no human involvement in the sorting out of this intelligence data that you have, and even the AI itself taking the decision on what targets should be fired upon. And this is why targeting these data centers is as crucial as targeting the Western gas and refueling and or the airstrips where the Air Force of the Western coalition and the Zionists attack Iran from. So the currently, as we see, looking at the traditional warfare, the West having to pull back all its air force, the Israelis also, to Cyprus and Greece and what have you, or attack all the way from the UK. This is going to, an attack on all these data centers and AI technologies in the region is going to force the West either to depend on their own data centers and AI that is far away inside Europe, and or start working with manpower again to sort through this information. One other thing that we should note about the use of AI in these genocides that are playing out is that these Israelis have decided to emphasize negative eugenics. And what do I mean by that? This is a term that I've made up right now. There is something called positive eugenics. When you have two people married and they want to check if their DNA has problems and they may have hereditary diseases. Negative eugenics is the West saying, well, we know that either the DNA of somebody makes them unique and a genius or resisting, and or the nurturing around them. Somebody has in their family resistance leaders or somebody to be proud of that motivates you to also become something special. Now, what the Zionists and the West are doing with this "where is Daddy" situation is that they are deciding to eradicate whole bloodlines to kind of not have to deal with, is it nature or nurture that makes somebody resist? Well, let's just end a whole bloodline. So we see the AI being the cutting edge of this negative eugenics. And this is why scientists, doctors, journalists, what have you, are all being killed with their families. So this is ultimately an attack on these data centers, and this AI technology is going to break this cycle of negative eugenics that the Zionists are depending on.
Another reason really why humanity needs to wake up to the atrocities that routinely are perpetrated by the Zionist entity right across the piece. And I think that's a very chilling tale that you just described there, Laith. But David, I mean, just say really a bit about how these data centers are used in surveillance against Palestinians.
Well, I mean, for example, IBM has this thing called the ITAN database, which stores Palestinian biometrics, which enables the Zionists to have their discriminatory permit systems, which is a cornerstone of what's called apartheid since the 1970s. So there's technology baked into the surveillance in the West Bank, as well as, of course, in surveillance remotely in relation to Gaza. So that is across all of these companies that are all involved in different elements of the surveillance, and some of the companies themselves, they don't even shy away from it. I mean, Alex Karp, of course, from Palantir, has been clear that the technology is used by Western states to create fear, and indeed sometimes to kill people. He says, and he's said this publicly, and it's perfectly clear that they're fully behind that use of their technology. Now, let's remember also that these companies are also being used not just to surveil the Palestinians and to target them, but also the companies are being used to train Zionist intelligence forces, in particular, of course, Unit 8200. So there's a kind of curious relationship here between Unit 8200 and these companies, because on the one hand, these companies are training Unit 8200 people in surveillance and spying and all of the things that they get up to. And on the other hand, when they come out of Unit 8200, quite often they will go into the higher reaches of some of these tech companies. Now, in the case of the tech companies we're talking about, there are Unit 8200 people at the top of just about all of these companies, or near the top of just about all of these companies. But you also, of course, have the strategy which the Zionists have adopted in the last 15 or 20 years, which is that they've created a whole number, thousands indeed, of new tech companies, tech startups. And this is part of the propaganda fantasy about what the Zionist entity is. It's the startup nation. It made the desert bloom. They created all these companies. But these companies are, of course, companies dedicated to surveillance and spying. It's not just on the Palestinians, but across the whole of the world, as of course we've seen with many of the reports that we've done on surveillance, for example, in the city of Glasgow, or of the national security architecture in the UK, or indeed the ability of some Israeli intelligence-linked firms to have back doors in their software, which are then used by surveillance by repressive militaries and police forces across the world, and the Zionists are then able to access, for example, FBI surveillance data in real time. So that's the kind of the set of complications here, that this is an integrated process, and so the targeting of these companies, of course, is essential in order to try and break, as Laith was saying, US and indeed Zionist domination of the whole region.
Yes. Well, Leif, I mean, these data centers, I mean, they're hosted in countries like the UAE and Bahrain, which also host US bases. So, I mean, these regional countries, they're not innocent bystanders, are they?
Those countries was never innocent bystanders since they were fabricated and put into position of power by the British occupation and then the American tutelage. So these regimes in Bahrain, Qatar, Emirates, Kuwait, Saudi are illegitimate, enforced on their people through brute force, and have only existed because of that. So the regimes in these Arab Peninsula know that if there is no Zionist colony and or American presence to protect them, their own people would have revolted decades ago and have joined the Arab unificationist movements that started in the 1940s. So we're looking at the final stage in this vassalhood of these regimes. They are now, put in all their effort to make sure that the Americans and the Zionists win. Otherwise, they know they will cease to exist. And this is what Netanyahu or Trump are banking on, that these vassals know how weak they are without the direct protection of the Zionists and the Americans. And this is why these regimes will actually destroy themselves rather than stop being vassals. They will risk everything. They will risk all their finances. They will risk all their economies. They will risk their life as leaders of these countries, just to maintain power and to try to defeat the axis of resistance in Iran. So I don't think we will see any change in their behavior until their last breath.
Leif, with these data centers, we're seeing yet again how technology developed initially for civilian use has taken on a direct military function. And Israel seems to be the hub for this kind of work. And I mean, lots of countries rely on Zionist technology, which actually puts them in danger, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, of course, publicly, we're told that this started as civilian use, but as with all much of computer technologies, they start in military use, and then they are released, just like the internet originally was for military use. The reason that they made all these AIs public is because they needed the mass learning and people inputting information for it to become more learned in its targeting practices. But in reality, as we see, all these AI companies, their finances are bloated irrationally. The trillions of dollars that we saw being put in all these companies, when they don't have that value financially. And that is because, and only because, of the prioritization of them as a death machine by the military-industrial complex in the West. And the Zionists being dependent on showing that they are somehow the cutting edge of the death machine of the West. Of course, I want to be very clear that there's nothing special about the Zionists. Everything that we hear about the, a startup nation, as David mentioned, is all fabricated mythology. Zionists are stupid and dumb. Their economy is crap. If these companies don't come and, because of their ideological imperative, don't come and open these factories in the Zionist colony, there wouldn't be this mythology. Of course, these companies, all of them, have the whole world to open these complexes in with cheaper labor and safer locations, geography. But they are, because of their ideological belief in Jewish supremacy and Zionism, we see them, like Intel and others, opening their huge factories in the Zionist colony. So just to be clear here, the AI that we see today has always been from the start, from the beginning, for military use. The West wouldn't have invested in it for any betterment of humanity. They've always had their priorities as military abuse of the world.
Absolutely, Laith. Well, David, I mean, so far the strikes have been conducted against data centers owned by Amazon, and I think you were touching on this in one of your responses to one of my earlier questions. I mean, the other tech giants are also implicated, aren't they? Like, I mean, Google, Oracle, Palantir, IBM, and Microsoft. I mean, just say a bit more about those, will you?
Google has this thing called the Nimbus Project Nimbus, which is 1.2 billion cloud contract with Amazon to supply the Zionist regime with advanced computing and AI services. So leaked documents showed that Google had agreed to what was called a winking mechanism, which is a secret alert system notifying the entity of foreign data access requests so that they could bypass standard legal processes. And this was exposed by The Guardian and indeed by 972, one of the supposedly radical magazines inside the occupied colony. So there's all sorts of activities going on. Oracle, of course, famously with Larry Ellison in charge, and a woman for a long time who is, I think, the CEO, Safra Katz, who's from the entity, and their firm is explicitly ideologically aligned with the Zionist entity. Ellison, of course, is famously the largest ever donor to the Friends of the Israel Defense Forces, which is a charity in the US. There's an equivalent, of course, in the UK called the Association for the Wellbeing of Israel Soldiers. And these are charities which are there to directly fund the genocidal forces of the occupation forces. Oracle, of course, provides all sorts of services for the Zionists inside occupied Palestine, surveilling the Palestinians, providing, for example, cloud services for the Zionist Ministry of Defense, and it also manages biometric databases, as well as, of course, having the cloud contracts for the ministries of defense, the Home Office, the Foreign Office, and indeed the National Health Service in the UK, where all of that, which of course is national security sensitive cloud computing, with the exception of the NHS. The Home Office, of course, is where MI5, the Internal Intelligence Agency, is based. The Foreign Office is where GCHQ, our spy agency, the equivalent of Unit 8200 in the colony, and indeed MI6, the Foreign Intelligence Agency, are based. And so you can see that the fact that someone like Ellison and a company which is clearly openly aligned with the genocide has access to some of the national security sensitive internet architecture in this country is extremely worrying. So these companies are, what we should understand about this is that it's not just that they're engaged in supporting the genocide directly by supplying the technology to do it, but also indirectly by supplying funds to support it. But they're also engaged in projecting Zionist power throughout the rest of the world. So when we talk about Greater Israel, and then we talk about projecting power throughout West Asia, we're also talking about a Zionist strategy to project power all over the world. And that's why I've begun to talk about what I've called Pax Judaica, which effectively is the new world empire ruled by Jewish power. They call it the Jewish state. And some people say, well, you shouldn't call it Pax Judaica, you should call it Pax Zionica. Well, they call it the Jewish state. Are we not allowed to call it the Jewish state? Well, it's ridiculous. So this is actually about trying to project power throughout the world. And the tech element of this, through surveillance and through spying on allies, alleged allies like the US and the UK, as well as on enemies, is a key element of the projection of that power.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there because I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. So I'd like to thank our guest, Laith Marouf, and of course our resident expert, Professor David Miller. And despite the harassment to which we've been subjected by the British government, you can still follow the show on X, Facebook, Rumble and Telegram. So if you want to see us continue providing an antidote to the Zionist propaganda that's peddled by the corporate media, please consider making a donation to our fighting fund. With your support, we'll continue standing up for Palestine and exposing the Zionist colony. But in the meantime, make a date to join us again on Palestine Declassified next week, when David Miller and I will be back with more exclusive content that you won't find on the corporate media. So until then, this is Chris Williamson saying bye for now and free Palestine.